Cruis'n World is the 1996 sequel to Cruis'n USA, Midway's 1994 arcade racing game that was originally thought to be showcasing the graphical prowess of Nintendo's Ultra 64 hardware whatever. But when Cruis'n USA actually made it to the later redubbed Nintendo 64, it was 2 years later, looked far worse than its arcade counterpart, was neutered beyond belief with its removal of wildlife, Slick Willy in a tub, and the bikini-clad trophy girl getting replaced with a repainted trophy girl. The end result was a disappointing conversion that even made Cruis'n USA creator Eugene Jarvis admit that, yeah, that wasn't very good. Cruis'n World, on the other hand, that's a considerable improvement over USA, at least in terms of the visual aspect. Now, for the most part, the in-game elements are pretty much on par with the previous game, but with some minute improvements. The car models look a touch better, having a bit more size and scale than the previous game. The various tracks are nicely rendered, and the fog effect is a nice little transitional effect that is sometimes broken by blatant and ugly pop-up of certain elements. Oh, and they added skid marks and those flame effects. So generally speaking, it's a decent looking game. However, the overall presentation of the game, the scoring, the ranking, the typeface, and the whatnot, almost matches that of the arcade original. The cars and tracks do have a much smoother and cleaner look to them. While graphical prowess is not a barometer of quality and should never be solely considered as such, the fact that minor visual details are a noticeable improvement over the previous game gives hope that developers spent more time to make Cruis'n World the best possible conversion of the arcade original that they could hope to attain on the N64, or at least offer something that is miles ahead of what was offered in Cruis'n USA. And they've certainly done that here. Cruis'n World offers you 14 tracks for you to race in, each track modeled after a specific country around the world, such as Egypt, Russia, Italy, and whatnot, so there's definitely more of a varied visual palette here than in USA. Anyway, you can either race each of the tracks individually or go for the whole Cruise the World mode, where you race through every single track in the game, including a hidden track that takes place on the moon. No, really, the moon is part of the world for some reason. In addition to the standard Cruis'n mode, which is your main arcade mode of play, there's also the Championship mode, which is your traditional racing game where you race around a track in a number of laps and such. There's also a Practice mode where you can familiarize yourself with the track and prepare yourself for just about anything except oncoming traffic. And then there's the multiplayer bit where you can have like 4-player split screen, and I haven't tried that, but you know, I'm sure it works fine. High praise right there, I suppose. Controls an aspect of Cruis'n World which feels much more responsive, or rather much more solid than it did in Cruis'n USA. The analog stick, which contributed to the somewhat sensitive nature of USA's controls, is actually quite nice here, and it generally feels like I have much firmer control over my car than before. Of course, a tiny analog stick pales in comparison to a steering wheel control setup like in the arcade, but at the very least, control is somewhat more manageable here and not as hypersensitive as it was in Cruis'n USA. Of course, the core gameplay of Cruis'n World is the same as its predecessor: race through a track and attempt to claim the top spot to win. Crash into things and watch all the cars fly all over the place, and any semblance of realistic driving physics being tossed out the window. Only now you can pull off stunts and get points for it. You could go for that if you desire, a nice little bit of risk versus reward there. Or you could always just try to win the race and forget all that stuff. You even got a bit of a turbo boost kind of thing, which gives you a little bit of speed for a short while. And there's even some shortcuts if you can find them. And they're all nice additions to the overall package, but nothing that drastically changes the formula of the previous game. So if you played Cruis'n USA, you'll be able to jump into this one rather easily. Of course, if you didn't care for that game, then there's nothing here that will really change your mind, because it's pretty much the same game at the end of the day. I've already touched on the improved visuals of Cruis'n World and how it looks significantly better than its predecessor, but the one thing I haven't touched on is sound, which actually got a bit of a boost here. Cruis'n USA had a bit of a lesser quality to its music, sounding somewhat like highly sophisticated MIDI interpretations than sampled tunes. With Cruis'n World, the tunes actually sound like actual music, almost on par with the original arcade version's music. Sound effects are alright, each car has its own unique engine sounds, there's some voice bites here and there, it's alright for the most part, it's pleasing to the ears. Well, about as much as screeching cars crashing and flying all over the place would sound pleasing to the ears. It's not a perfect conversion job, however. There's a significant amount of speech omitted from this version, possibly due to memory constraints. There's virtually no wildlife to run over, possibly due to censorship issues. There's some occasional pop-ups when it comes to perspective and stuff, although there's a nice fog effect that more than makes up for it. Kinda like Superman 64... what? But there is 4-player multiplayer. That's cool, I guess, if you could find 3 other people to play this game with. You know, in many ways, Cruis'n World is the quality arcade conversion to the N64 that the console didn't get with Cruis'n USA. The racing is slightly better here than in the previous game. The visuals and presentation is a lot smoother. It sounds a bit better, and with the additional championship mode, the game has a bit more replay value to the package than the previous game. Of course, at the end of the day, Cruis'n World is still an arcade racer, based more on speed and simplicity than any semblance of realistic driving and physics, and anyone who needs realism in their racing games will not get any satisfaction with Cruis'n World, but rather disdain as they crash into cars that fly into the air rather than explode. But if you don't mind a quirky little arcade racer, then Cruis'n World is certainly worth a look.